Countdown for Wednesday, January 24th, 2024, day 9 of Donald J. Trump's dementia crisis. I can't believe Nikki Haley blew that 6-0 lead she had in Dixville Notch. I can believe, though, that Trump, bright orange, glossy, and sweating at his petty victory speech, did not do as well as he needed to, as well as his cult needed him to, as well as they expected him to, because 10 minutes after the polls closed in New Hampshire last night, Marjorie Taylor Greene was on one of the fascist propaganda channels claiming the vote had been rigged against Trump, even though he had clearly won by a lot. And I know she's insane, but so is he and so are they. Trump himself, who will never be accused of being gracious in victory, was clearly more angry than triumphant, and at times he seemed even more angry with the microphone that would not move when he tried to adjust it than he was even at Nikki Haley. And he was plenty angry at Nikki Haley.
Who the hell was the imposter that went up on the stage before and claimed a victory? She did very poorly, actually. She had to win. The governor said, she's going to win, she's going to win, she's going to win. Then she failed badly.
Still, Dementia J. Trump was so true to himself last night. Cranky, vindictive, small, full of easily refuted factual lies to cover up the reality that he lost New Hampshire in 2 consecutive presidential elections. Just petty. That he complained for a while, and then he had his creepy new Renfield, Vivek Ramaswamy, get up and insult America's intelligence for another minute or so. And then Trump got back up and basically turned his stochastic terrorist gun in the direction of Nikki Haley. Muted this time with a third party involved to carry out the threat. But muted or not, this was still a threat against Nikki Haley.
And just a little note to Nikki. She's not going to win. She's not going to win. But if she did, she would be under investigation by those people in 15 minutes. And I could tell you 5 reasons why already. Not big reasons. A little stuff that she doesn't want to talk about. But she will be under investigation within minutes. And so would Ron have been. But he decided to get out.
What an asshole. Anyway, Haley has vowed to stay in this race, even though she will not do as well in her own state of South Carolina as she did in New Hampshire, and even though Trump will clearly have done slightly better against the field than he did against the field in Iowa, and more or less he will hit everybody's expectations, but I guess his own, with 57% or more. Haley has also hung 2 albatrosses around her own neck. You cannot say, as she did, we almost got half the votes, and not have that shouted at you every day for the next month, even if the context of that performance makes almost half the votes more impressive than it might initially sound. Her second problem is more symbolic. If you cannot do very well in a state that has the same initials as you do, you have a problem. The overall issue, underscored time and time again within the Republican Party for the last 30 years, is that political office is no longer attracting as many quality human beings as it used to. And when I say quality human beings, I mean non-felons and non-idiots. Trump is a felon. Haley is an idiot. DeSantis is an idiot. Ramaswamy is 2 idiots. And Tim Scott is 3 idiots. There is also probably little to be gleaned from the New Hampshire exit polls. Half the voters there were not registered Republicans, and so the exits were far too optimistic for our purposes anyway. 44% voting in the primary say if convicted of a crime, Trump is unfit for the presidency. But probably more than half of that 44% are not registered Republicans. And the registered Republicans went for Trump by about 3/4. As to the general election, of course, 3/4? If 1 out of every 4 Republicans votes against Trump, Biden would win in a landslide. There was one interesting exit poll number. 88% of Haley's supporters say they would be dissatisfied if Trump wins the nomination. And dissatisfied is not automatically the same as I will never vote for him, but that is still a huge number, 88%. And even if all the registered Republicans were in the minority, in the 12% who would still be satisfied, you've still got a large enough number of dissatisfied Republicans that if the number were repeated nationally, it would sink Trump. If 1 out of every 4 Republicans votes against Trump, if 45%, 40% of Republicans are dissatisfied with Trump as the nominee, it would sink Trump. There wasn't actually a Democratic primary in New Hampshire last night, and Biden wasn't even on the beauty pageant ballot that they did have, which makes his win by write-in at about 68%, terrifically impressive. Dean Phillips got most of the rest, and he managed to be ungracious in defeat, swearing at reporters early in the day, claiming the voters missed the chance to do the most important thing in American history or something when they didn't vote for him. I believe the technical term for what he's been doing lately is hallucinating, except perhaps when he reversed his statement from Tuesday that he would consider running as the no labels candidate. If he had done that, he would have had to have entered a witness relocation program. As always, a primary sucks the oxygen right out of the political room, and that is too bad because there actually was a huge nuts and bolts presidential race news story yesterday, and it got buried. Susquehanna polling and research, not the best, but pretty good in Pennsylvania, even when it has seemed like an outlier. Susquehanna Polling and Research did a week-long poll ending Sunday on the presidential race. It has Biden winning in Pennsylvania 47-39. Most polls show Biden up in Pennsylvania, but like by 1. As John Harwood wrote, and he was the first reporter fired by the right-wing regime when it took over CNN, and a man I knew at NBC to be a small C conservative. John Harwood wrote yesterday, quote, "We're in early stages of massive analytic shift from Biden's in big trouble to Trump's in big trouble." I think he's right. I think this is just the start. And now, Dementia Watch 2024. Thank you, Nancy Faust. Apart from the stuff on the ground in New Hampshire yesterday, several other cries for help have emerged from the hellscape of Trump's addled brain. Most disturbing among them, he reposted an AI image supplied by a cultist of him praying in a church. How do we know it's AI? Well, he's praying in a church. But the dementia part of it is this man who is obsessed with his own image reposted this praying in church fake, even though it is quite clearly afflicted with the so far unsolvable bugaboo of AI, bonus fingers. In the picture, which is about Trump praying, hands clasped, his right hand has at least 5 fingers plus a thumb. And the left hand, which is partially obscured by the right hand, may have 5 fingers and 2 thumbs. Sure, put it out. They'll never know the difference. Not long after Trump posted, all caps, "I get much better poll numbers against Biden." And of course, he spelled poll wrong, P-O-L-E, as in stripper pole. And of course he did. He's a moron. He didn't go to school. Dad bought him a series of diplomas. It's not his stupidity. He's always had that. It's his decreasing ability to check, just in case, somebody does notice how stupid he is.
How do you bring these Nikki Haley voters, some of whom voted for you in 2020 but say they don't want to now?
Oh, they'll all vote for me.
How do you bring them back into the
They're going to all vote for me again. They're going to all vote for me again, everybody. And I'm not sure we need too many.
That was Londonderry, New Hampshire, about 1:30 yesterday afternoon, where first he said all of Haley's voters would vote for him, and then he immediately said he didn't need Haley's voters to vote for him, which is a damn stupid thing even for Trump to say, given that 43% of Haley's voters in Iowa said they wouldn't vote for him. And within the Republican Party and Republican-leaning independents nationally, 14% of them say they won't vote for him, compared to only 9% of Democrats and Democratic leaners who say they won't vote for President Biden. Trump would need every vote he could get. And just as Haley was willing to question Trump's mental state, so is her leading advocate from New Hampshire, Governor Chris Sununu. Trump has no energy, he said, at least twice. The guy can barely read a teleprompter right now, unquote. Why, Governor, whatever do you mean?
Which is incapable of solving even the smallest problem. The simplest of problems we can no longer solve. We can't do anything. We are an institute and a powerful death penalty. We will put this on.
Incapable of solvent, you say. We are an institute. In a powered death penalty. First rule of Teleprompter Club is pre-read the goddamn script, moron. Second rule of Teleprompter Club is never use the third person.
Yes, oh yes, and quickly, says President Trump. We will be there very quickly.
And the first rule of Campaign Club is never write your opponent's commercials for him. I have told you before of the reported Biden campaign belief that they want Trump to wrap up the nomination quickly because the campaign's research indicates that 3 out of 4 undecided voters still really can't or won't believe Trump will be the Republican nominee, and when he is, that will produce what Biden campaign staffers quaintly characterize as the, quote, oh shit moment, and then a huge swing towards Biden. Don't write Biden's ads for him, example number 1. If you don't want to be connected to the lunatic fringe cult called QAnon, don't give a thumbs up when one of those infected with the Q paranoia shows up at your rally and shouts out their nonsensical slogan. And especially, don't follow it up seconds later with a smirking promise to pardon the traitors of January 6th.
Where we go, what we go
And don't write Biden's ads for him, example number 2. If you are not mentally well, or if you want people to disbelieve the mounting evidence that you are not mentally well, do not do sound effects during a speech.
And they calmly walk to a seat. Ding, 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 ding. They've only got 17 seconds to figure this whole thing out, right? Boom. Okay. Missile launch. Pshing, boom.
6, 8, 9, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes.
Ding, 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 ding. Missile launch. Pshing, boom.
We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Biden on November 5th. The stakes are too high for you to stay home. In stuff that is neither dementia or New Hampshire, if you're wondering where the Republican impeachment theater went, a huge blow yesterday to House Oversight Chairman Congressman Jamie Comer. Last week, the attorney for Kevin Morris, one of the Hunter Biden witnesses Comer deposed in private, demanded that Comer immediately release the full transcript of the deposition and said that Comer had lied about what Morris had said. The lawyer used the word mischaracterized. He meant the word lied. Now, some of the transcripts of the depositions have come out, selected by Republicans on the committee, and in them, 2 of Hunter Biden's friends have testified under oath that they never discussed business with nor received any benefit from the president. There is no cause nor excuse for any more impeachment talk. On the other hand, you know which investigation is suddenly alive in the House? The ethics probe into Matt Gaetz. With George Santos out of the way, ABC News is reporting that in the last few days, the committee, quote, has reached out to multiple new witnesses, expanding its contact with individuals who have ties to the initial Justice Department investigation into Gaetz and have begun conducting interviews. The lawyer for Gaetz' buddy Joel Greenberg, who pleaded guilty to sex trafficking, will neither, quote, confirm or deny that Greenberg is cooperating as House Republicans try to expel Gaetz on some kind of illicit sex charge. The trial to determine how much Trump owes E. Jean Carroll was to resume today in New York. It will not. Illness still running roughshod through the jury. And in a story that could flare at any moment into the biggest story in the country, the Supreme Court ruled Monday that the federal government can go in and take out the razor wire death traps installed in rivers along the Texas-Mexico border. Yesterday, Texas National Guard soldiers were caught on video not only still blocking federal authorities from removing the razor wire in direct violation of the Supreme Court order, but putting more of it in to kill more people seeking asylum here. Look, this isn't complicated. Texas has gone rogue, and its Governor Greg Abbott is in violation of the Constitution, to say nothing of all human morals. Didn't some senator threaten to have me arrested for saying the court could be ignored? Well, if those are the rules, President Biden now has the right to federalize the Texas National Guard, the way Eisenhower and Kennedy federalized the National Guard when lawless governors in the 50s and 60s tried to block court-mandated integration. And while the president is at it, he should send in a purely federal unit to arrest anyone who furthers this atrocity along the border. That means arrest Governor Greg Abbott. Arrest the scumbag already. Also of interest here, the greatest radio newscaster of all time, also one of the best ever in television, has died. It's also awards season, and as usual, both the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Oscars screwed it up. You nominated Ken, but not Barbie? And Tiffany Cross finally reveals which MSNBC host was behind her firing there, and you won't believe who it is. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
This is Sports Center. Wait, check that. Not anymore. This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
In sports, Dateline, Cooperstown, New York. The Baseball Writers Association of America continues its flawless voting record for the Baseball Hall of Fame. It has never gotten it exactly right. This year, it has managed to get it wrong in 2 different directions, depending on your point of view. Either 1 or 2 guys too many or 1 guy too few. The writers elected third baseman Adrian Beltre of the Dodgers, of the Rangers, of the Red Sox, of the Mariners, everywhere. The last player from the 20th century who was still playing in the 21st, an acclaimed Hall of Famer, and he got 95% of the vote. 2 years ago, the great Colorado first baseman Todd Helton, who was benched in favor of Peyton Manning as the quarterback at the University of Tennessee, Helton got barely more than 50% of the vote for the Baseball Hall of Fame, but this year he got to nearly 80 and was elected. Helton is a terrific guy, spent his whole career in Colorado. I always loved visiting with him. Smart, funny, self-deprecating. However, wins above replacement is not everything, but it's a good starting point. And Helton's wins above replacement, WAR, was 61.8, and that's less than Andrew Jones, less than Chase Utley, less than Reggie Smith, less than Willie Randolph, less than Buddy Bell. None of them are in the Hall of Fame, and only Jones is likely to be ever. And 76% of voters chose the Twins catcher and later first baseman Joe Mauer. 75% needed for election, and he got 76. Everybody loved Mauer, and he won 3 batting championships as a catcher. Unheard of. But at age 30, after injuries, he turned back into a pumpkin. Like Helton, extremely popular, a local icon, always a pleasure to deal with, and I'm not sure what he's doing in the Hall of Fame. His wins above replacement is less than that of Robin Ventura and Johnny Damon and Will Clark and Jim Wynn and Chet Lemon and a whole lot of other guys who would themselves tell you, we are not Hall of Famers. Billy Wagner, the Astros, Phillies, and Mets closer, missed by 5 votes of being the 4th player elected, and he would have been a controversial choice too. Gary Sheffield, himself a controversial slugger, got only 64% in his last year of eligibility and has now fallen off the ballot. Reuters' Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez did not get close, so at least the writers got that right. Dateline New York, since it is 21 days until spring training, and since both the local teams are unlikely to have to worry about being in the pennant races, why shouldn't the lead stories about the New York Yankees and New York Mets be about their uniforms? The uniform-centric website UniWatch reports that the Yankees will make their first serious change to one of their uniforms since 1973. UniWatch reports the Yankees will be taking off the white outlining and white sleeve trim. That's the little dark blue, white blue, dark blue ring at the end of the sleeves. They'll take that off their road uniforms, which will just basically be gray with the word New York on them. Those unis will now look like the ones the Yankees wore from the teens until 1973. By the way, in the winter of 1975, Yankees owner George Steinbrenner decided he really wanted to change their road uniforms from gray to dark blue with white pinstripes. And somebody managed to talk him out of it because the Yankees were not a 1930s movie. As to the New York Mets, UniWatch says they have scheduled April 26th for the debut of their City Connect uniforms. If you're unfamiliar, think of the worst uniforms you could put baseball players in, then screw up the colors, then drop some acid and redesign them so they look even worse, and then you have your City Connect uniforms. The Red Sox City Connect uniforms look like the Boston phone book. The White Sox City Connect uniforms have the same exact lettering as a vodka advertisement. The Chicago Cubs City Connect uniforms are, in fact, duplicates of uniforms the Chicago White Sox used to wear. The Padres all look like Toucan Sam. The Colorado Rockies look like somebody spilled paint on the shoulders of some otherwise okay green uniforms. The Arizona Diamondbacks look great, largely because the Arizona Diamondbacks' regular uniforms look like crap. Nobody knows what the Mets City Connect uniforms are going to look like in April, but if you want to place a bet, just bet on they'll suck. Postscripts to the news, some headlines, some updates, some snark, some format changes, some predictions. Dateline Hollywood, the Oscars. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and gym and lunch and whatever, the Oscars committee has done it again. How do they do this? How do they always do this? Now look, Barbie is not my kind of film. So what? Doesn't have to be. Apparently they made it good. And if you nominate it for good enough to be Best Picture, and you nominate one of its actors as Best Supporting Actress, and you nominate Ken as Best Supporting Actor, how in the hell do you not nominate Barbie herself as Best Actress? Margot Robbie got snubbed, and the director, Greta Gerwig, also snubbed, not nominated. Sounds a little misogynistic to me. Of course, the Oscars have always done this. The runaway winner of the Oscars for 1941 was the movie How Green Was My Valley. For Best Supporting Actor, Donald Crisp in How Green Was My Valley beat out Sidney Greenstreet in The Maltese Falcon. For Best Director, John Ford of How Green Was My Valley beat out Orson Welles for a little flim he called Citizen Kane. For Best Art Direction and Best Cinematography, How Green Was My Valley also beat out Citizen Kane. For Best Film, How Green Was My Valley beat out Citizen Kane and The Maltese Falcon and Hitchcock's Suspicion, and even Here Comes Mr. Jordan, which is just a charming little film. Just a quick quiz. Don't Google this. Just tell me who, besides Donald Crisp, was in How Green Was My Valley? Or what was my picture about? How green was my valley? What was I about? Or was I in color? Citizen Kane, The Maltese Falcon, and Suspicion got a total of 22 nominations for 1941 and a total of 3 Oscars. And ever since, people who actually know Hollywood have viewed them, the Oscars, and the Oscars nominations and the Oscars winners as the Toronto Maple Leafs of awards. Whatever the decade, whatever the style, you can count on the Oscars and the Maple Leafs to find a way to screw it up. One might think that the annual Oscars screw-up is designed just for the publicity. I mean, you're trying to drive a TV audience to watch the awards show and drive a movie audience to watch the movies and a streaming or DVD audience to watch the movies at home. Publicity about controversy? It's as useful as publicity about serenity. Maybe that also explains the Toronto Maple Leafs. I never thought of that before. By the way, the answer to my little challenge, How Green Was My Valley, was about Welshmen. It was about Welsh miners, the Morgan family. It starred Walter Pidgeon, Maureen O'Hara, and Roddy McDowell. And I swear, until I looked it up, I had always assumed, since I was a teenager, I just assumed How Green Was My Valley was that John Wayne film about the boxer who goes home to Ireland. But no, apparently that's The Quiet Man. How Green Was My Valley is about Welshmen. And to answer the rhetorical question in the title, How Green Was My Valley? Not very green. The film is in black and white. Dateline the Kremlin. I left this out yesterday. Anyway, the actual anniversary was Sunday, but it's too good to let it go. Sunday was the 100th anniversary of the day the Russian revolutionary Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin, died. It was also the 100th anniversary of the day the British comedian Benny Hill was born. Wait, there's more. This is too good to check. I don't want to find out this is not true. Lenin, it is said, died on January 21st, 1924, at 4:50 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. We know that. That's the literal announcement. 4:50 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And Benny Hill was supposedly born on January 21st, 1924, same day, at 7:50 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which explains either Russia or British comedy or both. Thank you, Nancy Faust. Dateline, New Jersey. The best radio newscaster of all time has died. Charles Osgood passed away at his home after a lengthy battle with dementia yesterday. After 15 years in radio and TV, most of them in Baltimore, he signed on WCBS Radio in New York, the first of the legendary CBS all-news radio stations, in 1967. Osgood was quickly promoted to primary morning anchor on the CBS radio network. He did up to 6 newscasts a day, then to CBS's morning television news, and finally in 1994, the job for which he will be remembered, the anchor and the centerpiece of the CBS News program Sunday Morning. He retired from it and from his continuing radio assignment, The Osgood File, in 2016. And none of this captures what he did. The TV was great. He was at perfect pitch nearly all the time, pleasant, authoritative, knowledgeable, serious, occasionally silly. But nobody wrote better for radio ever. Nobody. His mantra, short words, short sentences, short paragraphs. In 1981, I happened to be listening to WCBS in New York, preparing for my workday in radio, and Charles Osgood devoted an edition of the Osgood File to the story of a man who was drowning in a river in Idaho, who was saved because a worker driving a one-man train over a trestle over that river saw him, then saw a work train coming on in the opposite direction on the other track, scribbled a note about the drowning man, rolled it up into the ball, and threw it into the window of the passing train engine. The engineer read the note, stopped the train at the trestle, and they saved the drowning man. It is an extraordinary story. I do not do it justice. And I certainly do not do justice how Charles Osgood told that story. My heart only stopped racing about 5 minutes after he signed off. The only time in my life I have ever written to anybody in this business asking for a copy of their script, it was to Charles Osgood for that Idaho story. I still have the copy somewhere. Osgood did at least one book of his scripts called The Osgood Files if you want to learn how to write for stuff that's going to be read aloud. Get it. 15 years ago, maybe, I bumped into him at a corner deli in my neighborhood. I introduced myself. I told him about that story. 1981, he said. Goodness. I got to tell him that's how good he was at what he did. He then said goodbye, as he used to on all of his television appearances. See you on the radio. Charles Osgood was 91 years old. Still ahead on Countdown, since I am about to mention somebody from MSNBC as the worst person in the world. Spoiler alert. Why not also tell you about the day I ran into somebody else from there who could win that honor? The guy who, while my father was dying, filled in for me on the network, and while he did so, he tried to get me fired, he tried to take over my show, and when that failed, he tried to rustle all my producers to go work for him on his own show. Who could it be? Coming up in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First time for the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world, except for that one guy. The bronze worse, Mayor Eric Adams of New York City. The tone deafness, it hurts. This is a tiny thing, but so is Eric Adams. New York's City Council scheduled a press conference in the rotunda of City Hall in New York yesterday. The mayor did not authorize it. The City Council was going to do something that went against Mayor Adams's ego. So his staffers went down to where they were setting up the press conference, and they took away all the City Hall chairs that were being placed for the press and the council members. And of course, they got themselves recorded on video doing so, looking like petty, childish amateurs. And that's probably unfair to the staffers because we all know that the petty, childish amateur in City Hall in New York is the mayor. The runners-up, worser, Chaya Raichik, the libs of TikTok witch, or as Harvard's Alejandro Caraballo calls her, terrorist Chaya Raichik, and Oklahoma Superintendent of Schools Ryan Walters. In August, Raichik targeted a Tulsa elementary school librarian because she's one of the worst persons in the world. That's why she targeted the other woman. The school received at least half a dozen bomb threats because Raichik is supported by the kind of coward, slug lunatics who do that stuff. Now, writing, "No one has done more to expose what the radical left is all about, porn in schools, woke indoctrination," this fascist school superintendent, Walters, has named her to the Oklahoma State School Library Media Advisory Committee. I say this every time, and I mean it, because the fascists are not going to stop voluntarily, and you're not going to vote them out, and you're not going to get the Supreme Court to stop them. Not in Oklahoma, you're not. The only way to beat them is to break them. And the only way to break them is for every employer outside of Oklahoma and every college and junior college and grad school outside of Oklahoma to state simply that an Oklahoma high school diploma is not sufficient to get a job or to get admission to a college outside Oklahoma. In other words, the states that are trying to turn public education into fascism factories or to destroy it outright, they have to be quarantined, blockaded. But our winner, the worst even than that, Joey Scars. MSNBC's hot and cold double faucet of running fraud. It's fake non-conservative, the man who mainstreamed Trump on the network, the man who wanted to be Trump's vice president, the man who now pretends like that never happened, the man who broke up his co-host's marriage, the man who once carried water for Newt Gingrich, the single biggest scumbag I have ever worked with, Joe effing Scarborough. Remember when MSNBC fired the host of its top weekend show? No, not Mehdi Hassan. The one before that, Tiffany Cross. She's finally gone public with what happened. Tiffany Cross said she had an on-air argument over race with, who knows, Joe Scarborough, a racist. Or as she calls him on her new podcast, Joe Scarborough, MSNBC's favorite white boy. I guess he's favorite. There's nobody whiter. And after that, Scarborough, she says, did everything he could to undermine her and keep her from getting her own show and then get her own show canceled. Quote, there's an unspoken rule that you're not supposed to disagree with Joe, and I didn't get the memo. You may remember once at a convention I once said after Joe threw out standard Republican talking points that he should go get a shovel. He was so shocked that I actually said that about him on the air. It was an accident. My mic wasn't supposed to be open. I was glad it was open. I apologized to him for saying it on the air. It was true. Joe Scarborough shovels shit every day. Anyway, I know the feeling that Ms. Cross is having here. Scarborough sabotaged my show when he could, and Maddow's, and then Lawrence O'Donnell's, and he basically sabotaged every show he did not control. He had something, never found out what, on the previous MSNBC president, Phil Griffin, who got fired 2 years ago, and he used it against Griffin. He got some of my guests canceled. He got some of them banished from the network. He had his staffers trying to find out our upcoming guest bookings on Countdown so he could steal the guests or screw up the scheduling or threaten them that if they went on my show, they couldn't go on his show. After he attacked me once on Twitter, a violation of MSNBC rules that was supposed to result in an automatic suspension, Scarborough threatened the president, Phil Griffin, and me, and my agent, and my producer, that if he was suspended, as the rule said, he would tell everybody I got him suspended because he was a conservative and I secretly ran the place. Tiffany Cross also said that her other fatal mistake was not criticizing Trump enough. That may sound like a paradox, but she wanted to talk a host of issues not related directly to the presidential race or the Trump crises, and MSNBC told her to cut it out and just do what they said, which is what they did to me in 1998 when I wanted to talk about something other than Clinton Lewinsky. Cross also said after Tucker Carlson accused her of trying to start a genocide against American white people, no, we don't want to kill all white people, Tucker. Just one's named Tucker. The network didn't even issue a statement in support of her. And after it fired her, it planted as many bad stories about her as it could. That is the NBC playbook. And the Scarborough playbook. And Scarborough has long run roughshod over official management there, which is why MSNBC has sunk into mediocrity in a time when events should have given it a monopoly. It has done so because of 3 words: Joe Scarborough's ego. So thank you, Tiffany Cross, for reminding us. Joe Scarborough, today's and everyday's worst person in the world! And he's getting it up at 2 o'clock every morning. Now to the number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me and things I promised not to tell. Early on the afternoon of Monday, May 23rd, 2016, I bounced out of my New York City apartment building, began to walk past the tourist trap brunch spot in the lobby, and froze. There, at one of the cramped outdoor tables, staring up at me in blank surprise that must have matched my own staring down at him in blank surprise, was Lawrence O'Donnell. I decided to go silly. "Hey, get out of my house." He laughed. I laughed. It didn't seem forced. He introduced me to his companion, his daughter. "This, my dear, is Keith Olbermann. Keith started us all at MSNBC, and then he left, and here Lawrence gave one of his long pauses, and we crashed it." I wanted to be generous. I started to politely contradict him, and I just couldn't do it. Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, about 30 seconds of courteous nothingness followed, and I wished the O'Donnells well, and then I left. It was the most pleasant experience I ever had with Lawrence O'Donnell. In fact, it might have been the only pleasant experience I ever had with Lawrence O'Donnell. After I finally convinced and bullied and blackmailed MSNBC management into letting Rachel Maddow become the regular guest host for my show, and she aced it, and then rightly got her own show, and she aced that, and became a star, I went looking for a new guest host. My first idea was a frequent guest we had named Chris Hayes. I didn't get far. Management had its own idea, and my input was not required. They wanted former Vermont governor and Democratic presidential hopeful Howard Dean. And Howard is a really smart guy and great on TV, but Howard had a bit of a teleprompter problem. One of my producers swears that Howard once read, "Good evening, I'm Howard. Dean, former governor of Vermont, this is Countdown." I do know whatever he did on the air, it was bad enough that one week, when I was off and at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, and a baseball news story broke and he was filling in for me, my producers called me there and asked me to come on from the streets of Cooperstown and be a guest on my own show, just to help Howard Dean out. Anyway, their next idea was a guy who had been kicking around MSNBC since its founding in 1996. Lawrence O'Donnell was one of the original MSNBC Friends. The MSNBC Friends. Political pundits who sat on clear stools at a clear table or in a set designed to look like a booth at a coffee shop. No, I'm not making this up. Among the Friends were Ann Coulter and Laura Ingraham, if you can believe it. Once or twice an hour, the rather CNN-like all-news coverage on MSNBC in its first couple of years would pause, and three or more of these friends would appear, chew over the MSNBC headlines, and then disappear. Lawrence O'Donnell was one of the friends. It was as bad as it sounds. Then Lawrence O'Donnell pretty much disappeared. You would see him on MSNBC as a guest every once in a while, but mostly he pursued his acting and producing career. He played President Bartlett's father on The West Wing, the one who beat him throughout college. Lawrence was very convincing. And then around 2008, we started getting pressure to bring him in as a guest on Countdown, like once a week or twice a week. I was not sure what that was all about, but he had been a Senate staffer, and he knew the health care debate and other wonky stuff pretty well, so I gave my assent for whatever that was worth. Not long after that, Lawrence came into my office. He really needed my support, he said, to get him more involved in MSNBC. He knew I had gone to bat for Rachel, and before her, I'd gone to bat for Tom Brokaw, and for people like Chuck Todd and Chris Hayes and others who are now getting steady incomes from NBC. I don't remember his argument on his own behalf. I do remember I didn't have much of a reason to say no, and he wasn't asking me to do a lot, so I said yes. The next thing I knew, I was reading a memo announcing that Lawrence O'Donnell had been appointed as the new full-time guest host of Countdown. This was in the winter of 2009-2010, when my late dad was fighting so valiantly to stay alive after colon cancer and, more importantly, a series of infections. Dad had the immune system of an alien. The average white cell count in a healthy adult is between 4,000 and 11,000. One night, Dad's was at 33,000. And the doctors told me to prepare to make the call to let him go. They had one antibiotic left to try on him. The next morning, Dad's white cell count, which had been 33,000, was 8,000. Onward he fought. Unfortunately, he was 80 years old, and he had not exercised since Harry Truman was president, and eventually he ran out of Houdini tricks. I had been visiting him twice a day for 6 months while still doing Countdown and the NBC Sunday Night Football show, but now, as it hit late February of 2010, his bright days became fewer and farther in between, and the hope that was propelling me to keep being his full-time caregiver and Countdown's full-time host both began to fade. In the last 2 weeks of my dad's life, as the doctors tried all the long-shot things, I asked MSNBC for a leave of absence. Finally, the inevitability became inarguable, and we let Dad go on Saturday, March 13th, 2010. My sister held his hand, and I read him his favorite Thurber story, and as soon as I finished it, he exhaled deeply and peacefully, and he died. I think I took another week off, maybe 2, and I vaguely recall emails from friends at Countdown that I may have paid passing attention to, but I really didn't. Most of the staff, including people who came up from Washington, like Howard Feynman or Gene Robinson of the Washington Post, always friends to me. They attended my dad's memorial service. I believe Lawrence O'Donnell, who was, of course, filling in for me on Countdown, was there too, but maybe not. I do not remember. And then came the day when I went back to the office full-time and my assistant grabbed me. Both hands on my wrist. "You did not answer my emails," she said with a fervency she rarely exhibited. "For God's sake, do not ever leave me alone with Lawrence O'Donnell again." I snapped back to attention. Had he, bothered her? "Not that way," she said, "but he's a son of a bitch. He treats me and everybody who isn't a producer here like dirt. And since you didn't read my emails, I just have to tell you this. He's trying to get you fired so he can take over Countdown. And if you think he's nuts, one of your senior producers is in on it too, with him." I have to admit, even now, of all the things I went through at that very, very strange place, MSNBC, even now, this story still shocks me. The senior producers of Countdown consisted of a guy who'd been a producer who booked satellite transmissions for MSNBC until I asked that he be promoted. And one was a guest booker for the daytime shows until I asked that she be promoted. Another was a line producer who was well regarded only for his ability to time a show until I asked for him to be promoted. And then there was the old friend of mine who had been blown out of ESPN in a sexual harassment porn link email scandal and was headed back to college to start his career all over again until I asked that he be hired and then promoted. I did some digging, and I was going to confront O'Donnell about it when somebody told me he had tweeted something negative about me and about Countdown. So I got a hold of him, and I said this did not seem to be in keeping with MSNBC traditions and rules, the ones about not peeing inside the tent. And he said, "What do you know about MSNBC traditions? I've been here since 1996. I never left and came back." So I went to my boss, the president of the network, Phil Griffin, the one who would not hire Rachel Maddow. And before I could say they'd have to get rid of him, Griffin said it was all academic. They were preparing the press release as we spoke for Lawrence's new show at 10 o'clock called The Last Word. And oh, by the way, Keith, 2 of your senior producers are going with him to run his show. If this sounds vaguely familiar to you, it is the plot of the pilot for the old Aaron Sorkin HBO series Newsroom. I was still friendly with Aaron then, so he actually asked, as I related this to him in real time in emails and phone calls, he asked if he could use it in the plot rather than just what he often did, which was to use it without asking. The problem was, none of this made any sense in the real world, although it made a pretty good pilot for Aaron Sorkin. In going into the 10 p.m. slot, Lawrence O'Donnell would be replacing a rerun of Countdown. And even if O'Donnell did much better in the ratings, much, much better, there was no way it could ever make enough money to make the move make sense. O'Donnell's new show would necessarily cost MSNBC between $10 and $15 million to produce every year. Didn't have anything to do with him. That was the cost. The Countdown rerun cost not $10, $15 million a year. It count however much they paid the guy who pushed the play button that fired up the videotape of the Countdown replay, amortized. Later that day, a sympathetic NBC executive called me up and explained the move to me. First, Griffin was convinced O'Donnell was about to leave us and sign with CNN. I said, well, that's a good idea for everybody involved except CNN. Turned out CNN had not even talked to him, but Griffin did not know that. More importantly, Comcast had already finalized its agreement to buy NBC effective the following January. And as part of the deal, they were entitled to review what all the executives in the company had done, and they had already looked at MSNBC President Phil Griffin and discovered he had never done anything. In panic, Griffin told colleagues he had to launch a new show of his own immediately. This is the series Aaron Sorkin should have made. As to the producers who left my show to go with O'Donnell while my father was dying, one of them told me a couple of years after she left MSNBC for the last time, every day when I went into that last word office, I realized you were getting your revenge on me without even having to lift a finger. Lots of people I've worked with, probably a majority of people I've helped, have behaved like Lawrence O'Donnell, because remember, it's television. It is a mental illness. The comparatively healthy people are the ones who acknowledge it's a mental illness. But Lawrence O'Donnell was something special. A year before my dad died, almost to the day, in fact, I was in Los Angeles appearing on Bill Maher's show. And one of the other guests that night was the actress Kerry Washington. She was very nice to me, very sweet, a very big fan. And she asked to stay in touch. Sure enough, after my father died, after the memorial, after I was back at work, I had to go to his house for the first time since he had passed away. It was about as much fun as it sounds. In the car on the way back into New York City, the solemnity of it. Both my parents died within 11 months of each other. It really hit me for some reason for the first time full force. And I was about to lose it when the car approached a billboard overlooking the West Side Highway in New York City. And whose big smiling face was on the ad on that billboard? Kerry Washington. And it flashed me right back to her kindness in L.A., and it helped me overcome this bump in my morning. So I wanted to drop her a note. Nothing big. Nothing suggestive. I wasn't hinting at asking her out. Just, you never know how you might help somebody in a time of crisis. Thanks for letting me smile. That was the whole message. I asked my assistant to figure out how to get it to her, and that was the end of it. Except, a week later, the fact that I wrote her a note wound up in a column written by Ann Coulter. I was astonished. How? Why? Ann Coulter? It was her usual, the brain doesn't quite work right kind of stuff. She implied I was hitting on Kerry Washington and said how stupid I had to be to not realize she was involved with somebody, and on and on and on. No mention of my father's passing or the Maher show or the billboard or her smiling face. I went back to my assistant and I said, hey, what on earth did you do with that note to Kerry Washington? And she said, oh, I gave it to this Lawrence O'Donnell guy. And I said, good God, why did you do that? And she said, well, he's dating Kerry Washington. I thought you knew that. I thought that's why you asked me to get it to her. So it wasn't hard to figure out from there. Lawrence had called his old friend from the old MSNBC Friends of 1996, Ann Coulter, and told her about the note, inventing whatever motive his jealous little mind could dream up. It should have gotten him fired from NBC, but unfortunately his boss was just as much of a 14-year-old emotionally as he was. And meanwhile, I had decided to get out of MSNBC anyway when the time was ripe. As it turned out, it ripened in January of 2011. I've told that story in other episodes, like 60 of them. It's kind of complicated. And since nobody ever actually asked me why Countdown, the TV show, ended, I've probably got another 60 episodes worth of information about that. Anyway, In 2015, since repeatedly over the following 10 years there were overtures by both sides to bring Countdown and me back to MSNBC, in 2015, during the World Series, in fact, the then president of NBC News, Andy Lack, asked me to come back and do a new show at MSNBC and move to Los Angeles and have a co-host, a conservative, and not do any commentaries. And actually, this new show is somehow less appealing than it sounds. But the punchline of all punchlines is contained in what Lack wanted to call my new 2015 MSNBC show that never was. It tells you all you really need to know about The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell and MSNBC and O'Donnell's place in TV history and its demise and the end of MSNBC. NBC News President Lack was brimming with enthusiasm about this name that he had come up with for my new show. I've got the perfect title, Lack told me. We're going to call it The Last Word with Keith Olbermann. And I didn't laugh or guffaw. I just said, Andy, you have a show called The Last Word. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Andy Lack now laughed. Huh, hopefully not for much longer, I don't. O'Donnell, not a fan. Scarborough, not a fan. Then again, why would I be a fan of either of them? I'm a human being. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards, produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Richard Lewis, and everything else was, as usual, pretty much my fault. So that's Countdown for this, the 287th day until the 2024 U.S. presidential election and the 1,114th day since Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the 14th Amendment, use the Insurrection Act, use the justice system and the mental health system to stop him from doing it again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletin says the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.